please tell Phil, uh, he will be sorely missed, and I'm sorry, guys, he's my favorite Bunga.
This has definitely
We
been
know
cut out.
that's a lie. He's no one's favorite.
I like a grump. What can I say?
Yeah.
Hello, welcome to Bungacast. You may also know us as Auf Bunga Bunga, and maybe even the end of history. No, Jesus Christ, you've been doing this for fucking too long to fuck that up.
Oh
Keep
dear.
it.
Yeah.
It's organic.
Yeah, it's organic. We don't like organic on this podcast. We're all in favor
It's
of the
true.
artificial.
Milan ou Tripoli, Vilnius ou Benghazi, Paris, Moscou, on fait le bunga, bunga. Bangkok ou Bogota, Le Caire ou Jakarta, Gustavia, on fait le bunga, bunga.
Welcome everyone to Bungacast. You may also know us as Auf Bunga Bunga, or maybe even the Global Politics podcast at the end of history, but that's quite a mouthful, so I suspect you know us by one of the first two names. This is the first episode that we're actually recording in 2023, so it's 2024, shit. First episode that we're recording in 2024. For us, it's Friday the 19th of January, so welcome back to us, though you've been listening to us already at the beginning of this year. I remain Alex Tohuli in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and this podcast is also George in London. Howdy, George, as I believe they say in the UK.
They surely do. Howdy, back to you, Alex.
Philip Cunliffe, regular listeners may notice, is away. He'll be back next week. But look who we have here, Amber Lee Frost. Welcome back. Now a Bungacast regular, and she has a book out. And look at her. I mean, if you're seeing this on video, you can see that she's not just pouty lips and a cigarette, as the cover of her book suggests, but a real human woman.
If I knew we were on video, I would have gussied up a little bit. I only woke up a bit ago because I got a bit of a cold.
Right. No, and Amber's in Los Angeles, so it's much earlier. You may also know it as LA. Anyway, that's a city where she is, I think. And we're going to be talking about her book, Dirtbag, which is kind of a memoir, partly a kind of discussion and critique of the millennial left. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then in the bonus stuff, stick around if you're a subscriber. And if you're not, it's patreon.com/Bungacast. We're going to be talking a little bit about the World Economic Forum at Davos, which is going on now, whether there's a vibe shift going on amongst the elite. And then we're going to talk about the US election, a little bit of a preview there. But also, we're going to be talking about the DSA. That's going to kind of be the meat of the sandwich, I guess, or the kind of the bit that joins up the two. It's basically like a really bready sandwich with a bit of meat, but the little bit of meat is what I'm talking about now. That little bit of meat is the Democratic Socialists of America and what's going on there, an organization that Amber was a member of for a very long time. And
I technically still am because I worked for them. I have a lifetime membership.
So they can't get rid of you. Or you,
No,
you
they
can't.
God knows they've tried.
So yeah, we're gonna have some more juicy stuff on that in just a bit. Just to give you a little preview of the year in general, because we're stepping into our 7th year at Bungacast here in 2024. If you've been with us for those 7 years, I hope you're not getting any kind of 7-year itch. We'll try to spice things up in the bedroom to make sure you stick around and keep interested. If you're new, maybe this is the first time you ever listened to us. If so, welcome. We talk about why the world is falling apart, why politics is back, and it's weirder than ever. This year, there are a huge amount of elections. There's probably the greatest number of elections, or the greatest number of people going to the polls in elections at any point in human history, which is a weird kind of synchronicity that's happened. Something like 4 billion people are going to the polls, or at least eligible to go to the polls. Of course, in November, there's the election in the global hegemon, or if that is an opaque phrase to you, the kind of global gorilla, if you prefer, the United States. There's also an election in the second largest, and now the first largest country in the world, the rising tiger of India. Indonesia, the 4th largest country in the world, also have an election. I don't know what animal they're meant to be. And that's partly because it's probably the largest country, which people don't really talk very much about. So we're going to be doing deep dives on the politics and history and society of all these countries, hooked on their elections this year. There's also elections in Mexico.
I have an Indonesia side, sorry.
Okay.
My Indonesia side is that
there's a good point for it.
in 7th grade, we had to do a report on different countries, and we got them drawn out of a hat. And I got Indonesian. I could not find shit on Indonesia. And a week after my report, they erupted into civil war, and I was like, "Damn it!"
Yeah, that's terrible timing.
I
That's kind of like
know.
Is this
podcasting as well. Like,
Really
yeah.
Is it the
inconsiderate of them.
CIA? The CIA giving you these assignments to do some kind of investigation into it? I don't know.
Everything's
Is it right?
fine. Is yeah.
I did Peru, which probably wasn't complete chaos at that time, but I didn't know. I just talked about llamas and the Incas and stuff. Anyway, also elections and stuff, countries we're going to be talking about as well. Some we've talked about before in the past. Some we're going to be coming to kind of afresh. Mexico, South Africa, Pakistan, and maybe the UK, which there I have an animal thing for. I guess it's the skunk that thinks it's a lion.
No, no. It's the lion. Yeah, the 3 lions. The 60 million lions. However many lions. Anyway. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Just have to defend my country.
Yeah, which is kind of
It's
like
not
falling
a
apart at the seams. Pretty miserable place by all accounts, culturally, socially,
Terrible.
economically, politically, especially. So, anyway, we're going to be talking about the UK if they indeed have an election, which my British-based friends, George included, assure me that there is likely to be one. I don't know. We don't know. But anyway, we'll be there when it happens, etc.
Don't give it away to the listeners. They have to keep listening if they want to know whether there's going to be an election or not in the UK and what we think
This
about
is their
it.
only source of news to figure out whether there's an election. Anyway, we're not an election podcast, but elections are a good moment to do deep dives into countries to explore some of their contradictions and how they are facing up to the crisis of the neoliberal order and the kind of falling apart of the end of history. So that's what we plan to do over the course of the year. We hope you'll be with us for it. You hope you join us or stick with us if you've been with us for a while. If you have, thank you, and thanks for being with us. There's also, I forgot, some kind of phony elections, which we might also talk about, kind of in Potemkin democracies. So there's elections in Russia, which, okay, we kind of know what's going to happen, but let's see what happens. And the European Parliament, of course, it's kind of another phony election. But, also always a kind of tells you where things are going, I guess, European parliamentary elections, even though it's kind of a rubber stamp parliament. Anyway, that's enough kind of previewing. Let's get down to Dirtbag, Amber's book. I obviously really enjoyed it. I would say that anyway, so there's no way I can convey my genuine, like authentic feelings for it without being accused maybe of just buttering up our guest and friend here, Amber. But I think it's great.
Hey, I'll take it.
Yeah, no, okay, great. So I don't need to do any more of that. Perfect. Let's let's get into it. I mean, actually, you're a critic of confessional literature. I think we've talked about that in the podcast. And yet here you are hawking a book of your own confessions. I mean, your confessions are mostly "I was right all along," so I think that's all right. It's better than.
I did a whole thing on Occupy that was a mea culpa about how wrong I was. I think it became very difficult to not write an "I told you so" book because that tends to be what you think of when you're in the heat of the moment and you're reviewing failures. But I like to think I reviewed some of my own failures, particularly like early on. But and I acknowledge the only reason that I avoided certain failures that a lot of people sort of succumbed to is because I came in around the time when we used to joke that DSA was just a Jewish retirement home. It was like all very old left, like guys and women whose like mothers were CP members from the Bronx. So, and I read a lot of memoirs too. So I kind of avoided some landmines that I think are very easy to fall into. And that's only because I got on the ground floor before there was all this momentum behind it. But no, I stepped in it a few times. I I acknowledge that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, so you joined the DSA in the 2000s, which is before all this stuff happened, before the end of history, before the global financial crisis and all the political consequences of it. So kind of early on, and I guess the way you characterize it in the book is pretty interesting. Both as kind of Jewish retirement home, but also talking about your involvement in it. It was kind of a quixotic sort of thing. People would see it and be like, "What the hell?" Especially in Indiana.
Yeah.
But so I think as a consequence, you kind of your experience on the U.S. left has bookended, I guess, the experience of millennials, right? Of kind of certainly for like older millennials, the period of anti-war activism through
Yeah.
to kind of the Occupy phase after the global financial crisis and the Bernie campaign. So I'm going to ask a question which I already asked a couple of weeks back on this podcast, which I asked Chris Cutrone, who has this book about the death of the millennial left. There's lots of books coming out about this experience, I think, now at the moment. So that's maybe telling, I guess, about lots of people reflecting back on the past decade.
Hmm.
We talk about the millennial left. I'm not sure you do, but there is certainly a kind of common generational experience of left activism, or a kind of generational sequence that has happened on the left. But I wonder, do you think it makes sense to talk about this in generational terms? I'd like
I
generational
think
politics
so.
are stupid.
I think generational politics as an agenda are stupid, and that's part of the reason why we had a problem. We didn't have the horses, because it was sort of the Bernie campaigns were not, they weren't totally millennial driven. We had some labor and stuff, but a lot of it was. I think we thought youth was a demographic. Something I wrote with Anton Yeager after the UK elections. But I do think that's part of the problem, is that it was generational, or at least a little too generational. I think youth movements are. I think they're stupid and relatively hopeless. Mainly because there just aren't enough of us, but also because at the time when I think they were most effective, or at least when youth movements had the most behind them, was specifically because there was the baby boom. There were just a lot
Yeah.
more young people. It's just they had more horses than we do.
Yeah, for sure. And that comes through, I think, like in my own experience and experience of other people that I've read about or talked about with them, that, you go to like kind of left-wing meeting and it's like a couple of old boomers, no Gen Xers, and then loads of millennials,
Yeah, they
certainly in the
dropped
2010s.
out.
And that's kind of,
The Xers really
yeah. And
dropped out. I mean, I guess that's the hangover of end of history. I'd probably feel more dejected if I were a Gen Xer than I was a millennial, because at least I saw something. I saw the possibilities of something. If you came around the end of history, you're like, well, shit, I guess that's it. Like,
yeah, no, and I think like that sort of generational gap, it maybe is problematic in terms of transmission of ideas, though maybe we actually need to get rid of all those old ideas too. So I don't know, that's a whole discussion into itself, which we can come on to. But also, yeah, the fact of it being a youth movement will necessarily kind of reflect the experiences of youth, which nowadays, does involve generally having a family.
mhm.
So I think that's
Or
kind of,
taking care of the older people in your family. It's fundamentally
Yeah.
not multi-generational, which I think is just you're tripping over your own dick. And again, there aren't enough of us. I don't know. It's I echo it a lot with Thompson in like Fear and Loathing. He's like, yeah, we were so sure we were gonna win, and it's very tragic, and you feel like, how could they have been so sure? And you saw it happen all over again.
yeah, there's definitely a kind of farcical reenactment of the boomers, which we millennials did, I
Yeah, as
think,
much as we shit
to
on
some
them.
degree. Which, yeah. So to move on to like what I think is the best part of the book, it's definitely the highlight. It drew wry grimaces and also laughing out loud for me while reading it. And we're going to talk about perverts. I think you have to get close to the mic when you say that.
Sorry, what was that?
Perverts. We're
Yeah,
going to
you
talk
have
about
to you have to hear the
perverts.
breathing into it.
You're getting the ASMR listeners in there with that, Alex. So they'll just repeat
Right.
that over
So,
and
so
over.
yeah. No, I will take every opportunity I have to do that. So, Amber, you identify three perversions, I guess, on the left commentary, left analysis, left activism, and it's like bang on, and they are masochism, pedophilia, and necrophilia. And
Yeah.
there are there's avatars for these perversions there, which you don't mention by name, but they're obviously there if you look at the footnotes. So let's go through these. masochism? Why? Who are the left masochists?
I think when you have guilt-driven politics, which I think is kind of a contradiction in terms, I think we agree it's not really politics; it's a perversion, but it does form a kind of political agenda where you're like it started out with as a privileged person, and which of course divides you. I mean, literally divides you, and is kind of not only anti-populist but just broadly anti-universalist. I think some of that, the germ of that, I would say. I mean, I'm a bomb the Bay Area type of person, but it's sort of like a Maoist origin, even if people don't trace it back to that, where it's like there is no working class in the first world kind of thing, and it also sort of fetishizes the third world or the people who almost live as third worlders in America, and you're just stuck. You're just stuck because you're constantly trying to sort of I don't know, sort of work a a kind of acknowledgement of of levels of suffering, like there's a metric system of suffering or something, and prioritize the people who you think are suffering the most, when in fact those people are in many ways not the best candidates to be the front lines of anything, specifically because marginal people are by definition marginalized. And I think we focused a lot on resistance, which is a very funny word. Because, like, if you step on a cockroach, that crunch you hear is resistance. It still dies. You know, resistance is I've had a lot of trouble, for example, with the Palestinian stuff, and they're like, "But isn't it heartening the way like people are rallying around?" I'm like, "No, they've essentially, I mean, lost, and there's nothing we could do about it.
Mm.
Like, if everything stopped right now, it would still be considered a massive loss just based on the death toll alone. Even if there was a I don't want to say like relocation because that's horrifying too. But even if Israel suddenly became a secular non-ethno state and there was new play which is not going to happen, but if there was a huge public housing program and reparations and a job program, it was still a horrible loss. And I think the sort of obsessions with I don't it's a fetish. It's a fetish for the suffering. And it again, divisive, obviously, but is kind of passing the buck. It's kind of saying, well, it's not our responsibility to work on alongside of these people. That would be intrusive and presumptuous, and we would be telling, the magical third world brown people with their intrinsic moral, ethnic, and political instincts, which I'm sorry is like racist. They're going to lead us. It's like they're fucking living in rubble. Like, what are you talking about? So
Yeah.
So,
yeah, masochism based entirely off of it passes the buck. It's based
mm,
entirely off of I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, which doesn't do shit, and it's annoying, makes you fucking annoying.
and then the perversion is that people kind of enjoy witnessing this suffering,
Oh
and
yeah.
so kind of perpetuate it. And
Witnessing the suffering, and I think it's almost a sense of like trying to I don't know, stealing valor is the correct word, but being like, well, if I'm self-flagellating about this, and I not just
mm,
self-flagellating, but if I take flagellation from like whatever sadistic opportunist, then like it kind of absolves me of like this sins of the father thing, whether you personally did anything or not. It's also very kind of, I think Matt Karp talks about this. It's also like almost the idea of genetic inheritance of like violence and oppression, which is like you can't pick who your daddy is. Like that's not that's ridiculous. I think I am sympathetic to the people who are like, well, I didn't do anything. And it's like it kind of misdirects the idea of inequalities based on, whatever nationality, racial, ethnic, religious group, into this strange kind of this strange kind of whatever. It's a search for absolution
Yeah.
Yeah,
to say
I
like,
think
oh,
so.
I'm forgiven. I've been a very bad boy, and if you get spanked enough, you're one of the good ones or something. Yeah,
Well,
it's
I mean, the,
perverse.
the thing with masochism, and being a submissive as well, to talk about perversions again, is that they are the ones who are in control, right? The
Absolutely,
submissive is the one who's actually in control. So not the dom. So I guess this
they're
is
the
what you're saying.
most
So the guy
demanding
who's like,
people.
right. And so it's like the guy, basically the masochist on the left here is someone who's like stands up and is like, as a cis het white male, I'm complicit in perpetrating all these atrocities and centuries of domination and oppression and blah, blah, blah. So I have no right to speak here. But I'm going to keep talking anyway, which is kind of
Yeah,
what I do in this podcast. But yeah, no,
yeah.
right. So, like, to move on from the masochist. So, I think everyone's encountered this kind of masochist figure, even though maybe you don't identify them as a masochist, but I think that's a really useful label. The second one, and here we're getting into darker areas, the pedophile. What is the leftist pedophile?
Well, I do think it's another way of passing the buck. It's, the children will save us. I think it did start with, again, the new left, because they conceived of themselves as kind of the front lines of progress, however they may have defined that. And then I think to some degree they have this sense of there's a tinge of masochism to it. They have this sense of, oh no, we fucked up the world. We have to, and then there's also this blame from youth, which is very short sighted because it's like, hey man, if you're lucky, you're going to get old too. But there's this idea that, like, yeah, the boomers fucked everything up and now we have to. It's like, shut the fuck up. What's this fuck you dad substitute for politics? That is very much the kind of generational politics, or maybe an extension of the generational sort of like youth politics, that automatically again prevents any kind of intergenerational cooperation or movement. I think as well there's just this really weird cult of the child kind of thing that happen. The Thunberg stuff with her fucking shrieking at me. I just remember being like, who is this little Scandinavian shit yelling at me? And moreover, I felt very defensive of older people. I felt very,
Mm.
fuck you. I love my mama. She grew up without electricity or indoor plumbing. My mother did not ruin the world. And my mother was a fucking Gen Xer. She was a teen mom that had a subprime mortgage. Like, shut up. You're talking about your parents. And it's almost sort of a presumption of the cul-de-sac as standard, the nice public school or whatever. But even then, even if your dad was a dentist, your dad didn't have the power to, like, your dad wasn't responsible for the 2008 financial crash. We've lived in a
But he was a
less and less.
sadist. I mean, he was a dentist. He's
Yeah, true. They're a different kind of pervert. But yeah, and it turns into this kind of generational warfare, and then older people, I think, in response are like, no, 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 it's gonna be fine. Look how wonderful these kids are. Look at all their ideals. And it's like, well, they're also stupid. Like, youth by definition is the state of being stupid. And some
Yeah,
people never grow out
energetic
of it,
but stupid,
obviously.
and like old people are kind of lacking in energy but wise. I mean, some people
Yeah.
aren't, but
Yeah, of course.
but so like it's kind of a the pedophilia actually is kind of a conspiracy right? This is going to sound terrible. I just realized what I'm saying. The
The
pedophilia is a
pedophile
conspiracy
conspiracy.
between the young and the old. Like,
It is. You
purely
couldn't
in this
have one
political
without the
arena,
other, obviously.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
in this metaphor anyway, it's both the kids doing a fuck you dad politics, as well as the parents or the grandparents saying, oh no, let's just, the kids are the future, they'll sort out all these political problems for us, we don't need to really care about politics or inform them or educate the youth. They're just, they're energetic, we don't need to criticize them, they're just energetic and full of ideas and creativity, let them go out there and protest, and they'll
Yeah.
figure it out for themselves. And it's like, that's an abnegation of responsibility on the older people's part as well,
For
right?
sure.
And kind of fetishizing youth.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. It's like it's like a child cult. But I think also, moreover, it exacerbates the sense of generational warfare between of coming from the other end. Like, it definitely one side needs the other for sure. But it's like they have this. It's a little bit masochistic too, because they're like, we fucked up the, like, no, you didn't. Shut up. You didn't. You. It's an overestimation too of the power that generations have, which we saw it with, we saw it with the New Left. They're like, we're winning, to quote Thompson, we're going to triumph over the old and evil. Look at all this momentum we have. And then you see where the wave broke. And then you see that exact same thing happen with, history. I hate the whole history repeats itself. No, there are new things. Shut up. But you saw the exact same mistake made during, the Bernie campaign, particularly the second one, where they were like, look at all the people we have joining DSA and knocking on doors. It's like, that's great. And it really was impressive. And I think if people came out of it without being extremely disaffected, and I didn't, I'm a lifer. I'm in the reserves. I will serve when called upon yet again. But I think it becomes this it becomes this weird, like, kind of never ending, like, if you don't resent the progress, the quote unquote progress that's going on, you immediately think it's going to be fixed the next time around, and you end up
Yeah.
doing it over and over again.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing about children, is it's all about potential, and what could be in the future is not a solution for now. I think the way you set out in the book as well, like it's passing the buck in both cases so far. Masochism and paedophilia, because taking responsibility for a political movement is pretty weighty. It's not a
Yeah.
kind of
Well,
easily done thing.
and you run the risk of losing. I mean, if you're a socialist in
Yeah.
particular, we lose more than we win, and we always will, because Goliath is bigger. And you just, part of being an adult also is neither getting so dejected you no longer participate, or having this blind optimism. Like, if you come out of the, and God knows there are leftists with blind optimism as well. There were so many people like, we're winning, we're winning, we're winning, who were like, boomers and Gen Xers, but they don't have an excuse. Like, the kids have an excuse, one, because they have so much future ahead of them, two, because you don't know anything yet. That is what the definition of youth is, not knowing things. And when you sound, oh, well, they're so mature for their age, that's impossible. Maturation refers to the progress of time, and mature for their age is what pedophiles say.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that this emphasis on youth ends up playing out in a way that, well, or there's something, maybe put it differently, there's something specific to our times, right, with youth, which seems a lot like what the boomers experienced, right, where there was a huge generational baby boom, a big cultural change which they carried through, after the Second World War, a new kind of affluent society, etc. But what's actually different is that there was a degree of continuity there with previous generations of the left, at least, if we're talking within the context of the left. The millennials, our generation, there was a pretty important rupture from past generations because of
Mhm.
the global defeat of the workers' movement, because of the end of the Cold War and the radically different
Mhm.
situation that presented. The fact that Gen Xers were kind of the generation of the end of history and kind of withdrew from politics. So you end up with this kind of gap, as I already mentioned, of kind of generational transmission of ideas. And so I think that
Mhm.
kind of increases the sense of a lot of millennials of like in the 2010s, hey, let's do politics. Shit, politics is
Sure.
back. Let's do stuff. But we don't know anything. There's no one to hold our
Sure.
hand. We're just
Yeah.
figuring this out for ourselves. And I don't want to be making excuses, but at the same time, I think it's just a reality that like on one level, we did the best we could because we were thrown into a kind of newly politicized situation after the end of history. On the other hand,
Yeah.
we fucked up. I mean, we didn't, like what has been left of the 2010s is very little, right?
Yeah.
The sense of
Well,
dejection, which you already mentioned. So it's
we are
tricky.
always going to fuck up, and I think if you think that if your belief is that you can win if only you don't fuck up. First of all, that's not true. You can do the very best job in the world, and I think I and still lose. And I think there's still conversation to be had about where we fucked up and how big those fuck ups were, or just how much of it was that they were bigger and meaner than us. But if you think that if we do everything right, then just stop doing it. Like if you think, oh, we're going to win if we do everything right, then just get out of politics because you're never going to do that. You're always going to trip over your dick at least once or twice. More than that, let's be honest. But I would just to go back to the older people again. I do think I benefited from having experience of from multiple generations and people who held the torch for a very long time. I mean, there should be like a statue of Barbara Ehrenreich in every town square after the revolution or whatever, because it's one thing to keep the faith as someone whose mama was in the CP in the Bronx or whatever, because you were very much raised with it, like you were in it. It was the miasma around you. And you also those people held the torch because it was much easier for them because they grew up with that. With Xers, I mean, it's insane that any of them came to the conclusion that there was more potential. I mean, that those people truly have the faith. But without missing an entire generation, I mean, I can't overestimate this enough or overstate this enough. When you're young, and you feel like it's just you and all your cool friends or whatever, it's not actually as cool as you think it is. It's actually, and I don't think we've confronted this, it's very lonely. It's very lonely not to have like elders in their experience. And it's true, they have less energy, they're more time worn, but you are supposed to sort of feed into each other. They have the experience, and we have the dumb enthusiasm. And it's good for us, a little bit good for us, to not have to, I mean, learning from mistakes is one thing, but not have to fixate on all of the losses that these people have experienced over and over again. And part of I think the pedophilia thing too is just that they're really lonely. And young people are really lonely. I think we're lonely without each other because it's like what we're just like fucking everyone born between the years of 1982 and whatever is on their own island, and everyone before that is on their own island. I think the Xers more than anyone have an excuse because they didn't have shit, but like and they just witnessed what seemed to be the end. But
Yeah.
it's just tragic. I really benefited from the experience of these older people. One of a few, I think again, it's one of the many reasons I missed certain landmines, that I can't be mad at other people for trying because they didn't have that exposure to that experience. I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot here, but
No, but I think, but that's all right. I mean, unfortunate references to pedophiles, loneliness, and islands, kind of in the news at the moment. But that aside, I think no, I think that's all. I think that's all true, and I'm deeply ambivalent about it myself. And in so far as, on the one hand, part of the problem of left politics today is a kind of repetition of the failures of the past. Like we keep redoing what the new left did, and thinking that that's what leftism is, or thinking that's what revolution is, or thinking that's what Marxism is. And it's like repeating the same old kind of attempts at cultural change or at kind of individual expression in lieu of actual building organizations, etc. So there's lots of things that we repeat, which would be better to kind of overcome that, or at least cut it away, at the same time as you want to have some sort of intergenerational transmission of experience, of wisdom, etc. So it's like, I think it's a tricky one. I don't have like an easy answer to that.
I don't really either, but I think it's the only way. I don't think anyone, again, just the numbers, just the horses. I don't think anyone's going to get anything done. I mean, who gets things done a little bit? The senior citizens, like, because they can be relied upon to vote. But not even that. We have a lot of elder poverty. Like they're chipping away at Social Security. Even what like little security they have in exchange for their votes for whatever, even right wingers at least pay overtures to the elderly. But I just don't
Yeah,
see anything happening without a multi-generational movement. And I think the second campaign actually did better than any sort of prior movement. The other thing is, I think people overestimate like the successes that we did have, or overestimate the influence of what the new left kind of was in its infancy. Like if you look at desegregation, like those were not a bunch of flower power people. And I think a lot of millennials are under the impression, if you look at them, they're fucking school nerds. And one of the reasons they were able to participate in those and play integral roles in those demonstrations, successful demonstrations for once, was because they could just not go to college for a semester and dedicate all their time and move to Alabama for a while and start just phone banking. And socialism requires a lot of spreadsheets. It's mostly very boring. And this stuff was years and years. I mean, that picture of Bernie being dragged off by the cops at a demonstration. Look at that nerd with his big fucking glasses. Like, this is not like the last time we were effective. We weren't. I say we, but whatever, we weren't particular. The counterculture wasn't really there. It wasn't really in place. That happened later.
yeah, no, and I think there's a lot of cinematic covering over what actually was. A lot of the kind of ideas taken about what the new left was also is itself a kind of perversion, because it's what you saw in all these films about Vietnam and whatever, and the hippies.
Well, yeah,
So that's not
and
everything.
because sorry, I hate to go back to this, and because boomers wrote their own history in the most romantic way possible. They're still making
Yeah.
fucking Vietnam movies. Stop doing that. Everything also, it was this focus on the hippies. They really want to romanticize what political gains they had. Stop fucking making Vietnam movies. There have been so many wars since then.
There's a
Sorry,
good
Alex.
moment to plug if you haven't listened to our series on generations, 5-part series on generations, which came out 2 years ago. I would urge you to listen to it. The episode on boomers in particular, it's my personal favorite, which explores a lot of these issues and kind of the self-romanticization of the boomers and so on. So listener, if you'd like to check that out, you might find it interesting. So to get onto the third perversion, it's probably the least self-evident. It's not entirely clear what it refers to, but actually I think it's probably the most sophisticated argument about these kind of degenerations or perversions on the left, and that is necrophilia. So take it away, Amber.
Right. So I think there is a generation once again, and I think they are largely millennials. I think that the ones that sort of, I don't know, maybe there are some obviously, like, boomers can't really do it because they just don't write these kinds of books at this point, and maybe there are some Gen Xers, but I can't think of any that come to mind. but they seem to love the working class, but only when they're dead. They seem to love what they see as an underdog, but even more so, they like it better when they're defeated. And you see it with a lot of sort of hagiographies, or however you say that word, of these amazing labor leaders that were sort of inevitably defeated. And I think it echoes a lot of sort of treatment of many defeated movements or peoples. I think, I mean, Martin Luther King was not popular in his time, but as soon as they kill him, oh, there's like a father of civil rights. And, you know, indigenous people in America, we loved them as soon as they were sequestered onto, dispersed, displaced, sequestered onto fucking reservations and essentially like large open air ghettos, and or just completely, the tribes that did sort of, I don't want to say survive or thrive or anything like that, but made any progress, it was through essentially like, a lot of Navajo voted for Trump. And guess what? We love them. America loves indigenous people because, just like Martin Luther King, they were these beautiful and yeah, there's some racist fetish there. There are these beautiful magic, I don't know, brown fairy creatures is whatever these people think. And you hear a lot of things too where they're like, oh, that's just so tragic. We killed them all, and it's like you didn't kill them. Okay, first of all, not a we. What's this we shit? Second of all, like they're still alive and around and have their own, political units and but they're not doing great, generally speaking. And I think that is what people like about them. That and the sort of romanticism of noble savagery that no one wants to admit to
So,
liking.
so
And
when
I
it
think
comes to the
do the
working
same
class,
thing with
what's
labor.
yeah,
Sorry, go on.
what's an example of like a necrophile phrase or something? What would a necrophile say, or maybe even name any noted necrophiles who wish to critique?
Well, obviously, I talk about Gabe Wynant, which is I just think it's the best example. His book, it was amazing. There's this, I think it's a Stuart Holland book, shit. That's, I think it's called The Entrepreneurial State. And it's all about planning. It's all about like state-based planning and development, and it's this idea of very classic workers owning the mean of production. And there's this beautiful modernist image, like the proper modernist logo design, basically, of a hand holding a factory. You know, workers owning the means of production. It's beautiful. And you look at Wynant's book, and it's a factory with the cross sign of a hospital on it, and it's like, how is that good news? How is that like, yeah, well, we'll just turn them into essentially like hospices. It's okay. The future of labor is taking care of everything that taking care of the people that, the defeats of labor have completely just, I don't want to say like decimated, but no, I mean it's lowered lifespan. I think decimation is actually like a pretty good word, but immiserated and, disenfranchised in many ways. But at the same time, this loving hagiography to the labor leaders of the steel industry. But obviously, like those people aren't looking for good like hospice care, or good like health care for all the injuries that they have incurred. We all want good health care, but also the idea that you would have a large unionized workforce, particularly of people who don't have to spend years and years on a really expensive degree. I mean, nurses are in many ways a good workforce for certain types of labor activism. But ultimately, they have a really, really, really rough time organizing for higher wages, specifically because one, hospitals are closing, there are fewer jobs, and two, they really have a lot of student loans to pay back. Now, we used to have a workforce of people who, I mean, you could go into construction with a record. There's no like a criminal record. There's essentially like very little, there are very few options for anyone with record. And America loves throwing people in jail, but you certainly don't have to go to college and spend tens of thousands of dollars. And I think also those people are more likely to have labor by the balls. But they aren't sweet pink collar nurses, which is how people think of that. Obviously, it's a highly professionalized job that requires a lot of training, but that's part of the problem. I think a lot of people are just scared of those big, scary men in their hard hats. There's this idea of like the blue collar roughneck who's inherently reactionary, and they're a lot easier to like when they've been defeated. So there's this kind of fetishization for these the noble underdog, the tragic and romantic loss. I think people fall in love with that, and that's really disgusting to me because it's not something you should be wistful about. It's something that you should be angry about. And I don't think you should immediately be looking for substitutions to those people who are in many ways just not in as advantageous a position as a large industrialized or infrastructure based workforce.
Yeah, so I want to move on to past perversions to something a little bit more something a little maybe a little bit more
different
direct.
sort of perversion, perhaps.
Well, a bit lying horizontal. Let's put it that way. That's what we're going to be talking about. Occupy, right? So we've talked about leaderless horizontalism and those sorts of ideas about prefiguration, and that you can just occupy a place and the new world will bloom from that. We've talked about that a lot on this podcast, probably most recently on Vincent Bevan's book about the kind of decade of global protest, which is kind of a critique of horizontalism. You dedicate quite a bit of the book, your book, Amber, to your personal experience with Occupy Wall Street, which at the time you kind of, I think, my impression at least was that you thought it was self-evidently bullshit, but you saw
I
it and you
hated
still
it.
stuck around.
I
Yeah.
But you
hated it.
stuck
I was
around. So
miserable.
So, sorry, can I just ask a question here then? So, you hated it and you were miserable, but you stuck around. Is that a kind of masochistic tendency
No, it's more
there to
like
be
it's more like going to the gym.
right?
You're like, hopefully I'll get some gains out of this. And also,
hopefully I'll get laid out of this.
I didn't, oof. Yeah, yeah. The, the issue was more that I was like, well, there's opportunity in this and you have to go where the action is. And I also had this very misguided idea. This is one of the things I take a total mea culpa in, is that like, one, I could go into it being an absolute fucking sourpuss and expect to do anything. To this day, I'm not really sure if I should have been there or not. But at the same time, hindsight is 2020, and I think it was the right thing to do. I think if you see that much activity, activity does not always indicate life. I think if you see that much activity, you have to think maybe I can get a foothold in here. Now, I could not. I feel a little better about it because I think most people couldn't, in DSA as well. I think, anarchism was all the rage. And I don't think I could fight, or even if a lot of us organized, which I think quite a few of us in DSA at the time, but like at the time, DSA was so small and nobody had heard of it. Even if we had coordinated all of our resources, I think it would have been swimming upstream. But I also think we had to try. I think I saw on a podcast a few weeks ago, and the girl's like, yeah, but I felt really like betrayed by Bernie. It's like, was all that for nothing? And it's like, yeah, sometimes get over it. Like, like, sorry, you're gonna lose. You have to be able to handle losing, and you have to
Yeah, and
like get back on the horse.
you have
So
to
actually,
take a
let
risk,
let
and if there's all that energy there, and I think that does come through in the book, that it, it's, I mean, I guess I was obviously knowing what was going to happen anyway, but rooting for you to kind of get involved in Occupy, to the extent of, here is a clearly, like, there's a lot going on here. You've got to take a gamble that you could maybe
Yeah.
start to provide some organization there, because it clearly wasn't there at the start. You've just got people walking around the park and, not really doing anything. And, maybe if you start looking like you know what you're doing and marching, people will fall in behind you. Why
Yeah.
not take that risk?
Yeah. And like taking risk is just part of it. You can't predict the future. You never know what's going to work or not. But boy, did I fucking hate it. It was just, and I think you're talking about just people just marching around the park. I wouldn't really keep it to that. I would give the people involved way more credit than that. Even the people who I think were politically and organizationally incredibly misguided. They were very active. They did a lot of stuff. It's just I don't think it was the best use of resources, and particularly I think the model of horizontalism has proven over and over and over and over and over again to just suck. It just does not work. And that's another thing that I had, I think, a leg up on because I had read The Tyranny of Structurelessness. I had read, and that's the most direct amalgam of it, is that Joe Freeman essay. Like, but there are other ones too. Like, obviously, one of the big ones is cults. If you read a lot of cult memoirs, it turns into, or commune memoirs, even the ones that didn't really, we'll say, go a little pedophile. Even those, like, they disintegrate because there's no structure. And I think the idea of hierarchy being violence really conceives of hierarchy as authoritarianism rather than a specialization of labor, which some people are just better at other stuff. I, for example, was not good at like outreach. This is in the this is in the thing too. I was just like, man, I hated it because I didn't think it was doing anything really, and I didn't think. But also, I sucked at a lot of the stuff that was sort of focused on there, and to some degree, that was like just sort of a learning process for me. But also, I think even if I had been good at it, it would have still been useless. So that I console myself with that a little bit. But it really was deeply frustrating to see the same kind of tyrannical personalities take over, or just the disorganization, or just the nuts. And it just favored actual authoritarianism. Whereas at least with like a structure and a formal organization, you could, provide checks, and, democratic sort of democratic approaches to, hey, this person's getting a little big for their britches. Otherwise, everyone was just flailing. The thing that really stuck out to me was how fucking nasty it was. And I think that was like a precursor to a lot of the horrible things that happened in DSA, which I didn't even get a chance to sort of write about because I didn't want it to turn into just a bitch session. I mean, there was a lot of very encouraging things that happened in DSA, but man, just fucking mean ass people. Just vicious, sadistic, authoritarian-minded people. I'm not like even the Adorno like F scale type person, but I'm like shit. Maybe when I remember that, and it's like you don't know how they ended up like that, but you do know it's very easy for those people to take advantage of and boss around people with essentially like a good and forgiving nature. And I think you
Mm.
can't really ignore like the emotional component of this. I think one of the things I didn't really get, and then I really should have gotten about Occupy, I should have walked away with, and I don't think it was until the end of the first Bernie campaign that I got it, is that yeah, a lot of people are looking for some sort of, for lack of a better word, community, which I hate that word. I think it's largely reactionary. But you know, a lot of people do need some kind of sense of belonging to a movement. And for me, I was just so fucking pragmatic about it. I was just so, I don't care. I already have friends. Like, I was cool before this. This is the, being a socialist has always been the least cool thing about me. But it's like people do need that. And I was just like, you fucking dorks. Like, and I was like, make real friends and then go into politics. You should be very wary of someone who doesn't have a lot of buddies suddenly, finding their calling in politics.
Wow. Yeah, because it might literally also be a cop, which you dedicate some like some funny sections of
Yeah.
the book to. But wait, so we're gonna move on to the bonus show on Patreon in just a second, where we're gonna talk a little bit more about the failures of the millennial left, the defeat of left populism, which we've done a lot before, but there's been some specific stuff, and also in relation to what's happened with DSA. And then we're going to move on to talk about, as I said, a little bit about the World Economic Forum, the vibe shift amongst the elite, and maybe a little bit of a previewing of the US election. But that's all on the Patreon show. Just before that, I wanted to just finish off the section by asking you, Amber, talking about learning things and learning from defeat and learning from mistakes. Did you learn anything while in the process of writing the book that you were in recollecting these experiences that you thought, oh shit, okay, something's new come to light?
Yeah, for sure. I think the biggest thing from a writing perspective and from trying to do what I think was my responsibility, which was to sort of tell the truth as best I could. One, the book was sort of pitched as a memoir because I wanted to get it published, and it's really not that much memoir. It is, we've talked about me having big criticisms of the confessional industrial complex or whatever, but I did, as I've said before, I think it was important to remind people that having a political life is no substitute for having a real life, and you should really not sacrifice the latter for the former. But I got really stuck. I mean, I had like a little bit of like a literary crisis. I was like, what the fuck do I say? I'm like, I can't, I don't want to focus too much on like, just a bitch session, because that's not, I think there were things to learn from it. And I think there were sort of important moments and good takeaways. And there were some beautiful moments, I don't want to focus on the romantic. I'm not a boomer, for Christ's sake. But I realized that I didn't have a happy ending. And that freaked me out. I was like, I don't have anything good to say. Like, you're supposed to, one, end on a joke, always end on a joke. And I could do that, but it would have been sort of dark. And COVID had happened, and I'm like, nobody fucking cares about this shit. I ended up adding a chapter about COVID just because it was, it felt like an extension of the. It did feel like it was part and parcel to the decline of the American. I don't want to the failure of the Bernie movement, or the defeat rather of the Bernie movement. But I was like, what do I do? What do I say? This is so. And then I'm just like, well, first of all, you're not going to tell every aspect of the story in one book. Try and you can write another book if you want where you cover other stuff, maybe a much more gossipy one. But you're not going to cover anything. Just try and randomly pick some points that you think are important and that you think would be significant to people reading, and relate them to the things that if they're reading the book, I know I'm going to have some degree of an audience that went through, that was a part of something that I was a part of. And two, you don't have to have a happy ending. It's okay. Like, sometimes things just end, and it's sad, and it's not the way you want to turn out, but it's literally, and I mean this literally, not the end of the world. It's just, I wanted to, like, look, if you really believe in this stuff, you're in the reserves. You wait for the next opportunity. Don't fucking throw yourself at absolutely everything. I think, again, Occupy is a good example where "Oh, I hate this, but maybe there's something there," because it was big. It became sort of worldwide, and it didn't work out. That wasn't as heartbreaking to me as the end of the Bernie moment. I was a little heartbroken by the end of the Bernie moment. I'll admit that, but you know, you're just gonna fail more than you win, and you just gotta keep throwing yourself into what you think is an opportunity. Again, don't waste your time. Don't don't be triumphalist about things. That is such a death knell. We're gonna win. We're gonna win. You want to find things where you can honestly and very seriously look at the resources of that you have. Basic accounting, people, money is a big one. Administrative help. Boots on the ground. You know, allies with some kind of power. And you want to say, do we have a shot at this? And if it's the answer is maybe, then, go for it. But learn when to say die and learn when to sort of forget that you failed last time. Remember why you failed, but forget that you failed, if that makes sense. And just,
Right.
move forward. I don't have a happy ending. And once I accepted that, I was like, okay, I can finish the book.
All right, very good. We're going to move over to the Patreon show. So thank you for listening, general public, but come join us over at patreon.com/Bungacast, where we're going to continue talking about possibilities, about creating new possibilities, and other ways that maybe the left populist moment didn't create possibilities for itself, and the other stuff that I've already previewed. So catch you there.